Mutating the request body in Postman is something that many people need when building complex requests. The most common use cases are signing, encrypting, and converting the original body. But it can also be useful for creating complex payloads like dynamically adding properties or setting some random data. Until recently, it was not really possible to change the request body from scripts. In one of my previous tutorials, I've shown you a way around this, but that approach still had limitations. Now, Postman allows you to take full control of your request body. You can even use comments in JSON. How cool is that? So let me show you how it's done. Let me begin by thanking Danny Dayton for this video idea. Danny is the creator of the HTML extra reporter for Newman. If you're not using this reporter yet, make sure you check it out. Link in the notification. It's absolutely amazing. Also, a huge thank you to the Postman team for finally addressing this limitation. This will make a lot of Postman power users very, very happy. Let's go back to business now.
So let's get started with a very simple request. I'm using http:/post as the endpoint, and I'm sending here a post request. If I'm looking inside the body, you'll see here that I already have a very simple JSON. So if I'm sending this out, we'll be able to see here in the lower part of the screen that this has been recognized as JSON and the values that we have sent are there. Now, the first step in order to be able to make changes to this request body is to understand how Postman works. And in order to write scripts, there are two places where you can do that. You can do that in the tests, where you're writing tests and everything. But in order to make changes to the request that you are about to send, you need to write this inside a pre-request script. And as the name says, this happens before the request. So let's first take a look at what we have before we start making changes. I'm going to use console.log and log the current request body. In order to view the logs that will be sent out, I will have to open the console. So let's resubmit this request. And here in this part of the screen, you will notice the current format of the request body. And it will contain many other things, so not just the request itself, but will contain a few properties. So the first property is mode, and the mode is raw because this is essentially a raw request body that we're sending, and we're formatting this as JSON. And then inside the property raw, we have the JSON that we're sending. And then in other property options for raw, we are using sending essentially this as JSON. So this is how it looks internally inside Postman. Now, this will be useful a bit later when we are trying to build a request like this from scratch. But going back to the pre-request script, what we can start doing here, for example, is adding a new property. This can be very useful if you need to calculate a signature or just want to add properties or remove properties. So essentially what we're gonna have here is a JavaScript object that we can easily manipulate. In order to get that information, let's first save what we have inside a variable called body. And we're gonna get it essentially from pm.request.body. And as you may remember, we had this raw property containing the JSON. Now, in order to actually make changes to this JSON, we need to transform it back into a JavaScript object. And for that reason, we're going to use here JSON parse, so that at the other end here inside body, we'll have a JavaScript object. Since now body is a JavaScript object, we can essentially start doing anything that we would usually do with an object. For example, we can add a new property, let's call it email, and we can set it to jane@example.com. Now, this will not automatically change somehow the body. We still need to get this information out there. So what we will do next is inside the same property from where we have read the body, pm.request.body.raw, we're going to set the new body. And this time it will be enough to put it as a JavaScript object. This will be converted automatically by Postman. So let's hit that send button and see what has changed here. As you can see in the response from http://bin.org, this has been again recognized as JSON, and we now have this additional property email here. And essentially this was the entire code that we needed in order to get this to run. Now we don't really need to have this request created here in the body. We can just simply go ahead and create this request essentially from scratch. It just requires a bit more code, but let me show you how it goes. So here inside the body, I'm going to simply go ahead and set it to none. So initially it will not have any body. And all I have to do is now from the pre-request script, start creating this body from scratch. Let me show you how it's done. I'm going to remove everything that's inside here, and I'm going to start again by defining a variable called body. So this will be essentially the whole body. Essentially, whatever you see here in the console, we're going to try to replicate something like this. So it will be the full object that Postman needs in order to work with it. So as you can see here, the first property that we need to provide is mode. So the mode will be raw. And another property is raw, and this will contain our body. So let's start by defining an object. So we'll have name. This is Jane. Let's say age 33. Here we have a JavaScript object, but we actually want to have JSON. So we'll need to do a small transformation here. So I'm going to use JSON.stringify. And as a parameter, we're going to pass this entire object that we have defined here. Finally, the third property that we need to define is called options. And options is again an object containing a property raw, which again is an object. And the raw object will contain a property called language. And language will have the value of JSON. So this is essentially telling Postman what we're sending here is JSON. So let's go ahead and hit that send button again. In this first instance, you will see that we are actually sending nothing. If you're looking here at the data, there's nothing out there because we essentially have just defined a variable. So in order to get this to work, we have to do something similar to what we did before, but this time we're going to replace the entire body. So I'm going to use pm.request because we're changing the request, changing the body, and we have this method called update. So when we're updating the body, we're going to provide here this entire body variable. Otherwise, Postman will not know about it. The first part is simply creating this data structure that Postman needs. In the second part, we're actually updating it. So now we'll see here the data is filled, and now the JSON will contain age and name. What's also interesting is to look if the header content type application/JSON has also been sent, because otherwise some APIs may be very sensitive about not sending this header. And as a previous example, in this way you can simply add a signature to your request, or you can simply establish at runtime which properties you want to send, how do you want to send them, and from the pre-request script you can use the power of JavaScript to really advance things. And since we're talking about signatures, one of the things that people are trying to do is to change the entire request body, for example, by encoding it or encrypting it. And I just wanted to show you a simple example with base64 encoding. It doesn't really matter how you have created the body, but at this point, let's say you are already creating this body from the body request itself. It doesn't really matter what's inside there. It can be JSON, it can be anything else. I'm just going to put here going back to JSON. So let's say you have this body and you want to encode it or you want to encrypt it. And essentially you have a function that does this for you. Now, if I'm going back to the pre-request script, what I can do here is to use again pm.request.body.update. And I can get the current request body, and that is pm.request.body. And I can use toString to get the entire string, or I can simply use raw. But that's a function that's there that can be used as well. So just an alternative. So this will give us the entire string. And what we can do is to simply add here another function that will do encoding, encryption, or anything else. So I'm just going to do here base64 encoding. And base64 encoding in JavaScript is done using the B2A function. So B2A will take this current request body that we have, will transform it essentially in base, will encode it in base 64, and then will replace the current body. So let me show you what I mean by that. This is how the current body will look like. Of course, it will no longer be JSON, but now this is encoded in base 64, and the receiver of this data can then decode it and do other things with this. Encryption works in a pretty similar way. You just need to know how to encrypt messages using JavaScript. All right, and finally, another cool thing that I wanted to show you that's now possible with this is the following. You can go ahead and, surprise, surprise, you can start adding comments. This is a comment. And there are different styles of comments that you can use. You will not get any errors here inside the editor itself. So the editor will not complain. However, when you're sending this request as it is, this will not be valid JSON. You'll see here JSON null. It means that http-bin.org has not been able to parse this information. So it's not valid JSON. JSON does not yet allow you to write comments in the way you've seen it there. But still, it's super useful. And now from the pre-request script, we can do something. In order to replace our comments, to essentially extract those comments before sending the request out. For example, let's define here another variable. It's going to be JSON with comments. And inside JSON with comments, we are going to get from pm.request.body to string. And let's define another variable called JSON without comments. And the way we're going to get those comments out is by using a regular expression. We're going to get it from JSON with comments dot replace. And this is something I gotten from Stackoverflow and also from the Postman issue tracker that announced the fix of this issue that was in Postman. I haven't tested it fully, so if you find a better version, just let me know in the comment section below. I was just lazy in terms of creating my own regex to get rid of these comments, so I trust that this is working. Now essentially what we'll have here is our original JSON without those comments inside there. So what we can do here is to recreate the entire request from scratch. I'm going to simply go ahead and paste here a code snippet so that I don't have to retype everything. Essentially, we're creating a new body object. Mode is raw. We have here the JSON without comments. Inside the options, we're again passing again JSON, and then we are updating the body. So let's go ahead and see if this still works. So as you can see here, this has been recognized as JSON.
While I have focused on JSON payloads, this approach works very well for other type of request bodies, such as form data or even for GraphQL. If this video was helpful, the best way to help me create more tutorials like this one is by giving this video a thumbs up and hitting me with a subscription. I've added all examples from this tutorial to a Postman collection, and you'll find a link in the video description. Also, do not forget to download the Postman Quick Reference Guide. It is free and full of code snippets that will make your life easier. Leave a comment below and let me know how you plan to use this new feature, and I hope to see you next time at another tutorial. One last thing before you go, don't forget that you are now in a JavaScript context, so you can do many crazy things like using JavaScript expressions, generating random data, reading Postman variables, and much more. So go ahead and play around with this.